comes Jillian. Or Sonny. Jillian. I heard that, Doris. Here comes Jillian.
All right, man. How are you? Yeah, it was ridiculous. It was all 20 pieces in it. There was 3 pieces. I had a hard time concentrating. Because I kept, if you didn't have your picture, I'd have gotten through it.
There was no cartoon there, right?
Okay, I'll have to get support now. Right this second? Yeah, otherwise I'm not gonna give you a chance.
We need to put, hey, Joe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, actually, I did. I posted it on.
Did you show, let me show Ellen. That's like 10 years old.
His son's a track.
I have to take my mother to the doctor at 7:20 tonight, so we need to get started.
Our equipment is ready to go, Madam Chair.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the Cuyahoga County Council meeting of the whole for Tuesday, November the 19th, 2013. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Calling the roll, Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Germana?
Here.
Mr. Gallagher?
Here.
Mr. Schron? Mr. Schron is absent at the moment. Ms. Conwell?
Here.
Mr. Jones? Mr. Rogers?
Here.
Ms. Simon? Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Mr. Greenspan?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
And Ms. Conlon? There is a quorum.
We have any public comments signed in related to the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do. To the audience, if when I call your name, if you'd come up to the podium, make sure you speak into the speaker, state your name for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes to address council. The first is Richard Fulbert.
Good afternoon, Mr. Fulbert.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, councilmen. My name is Richard Fulbert. I serve the Cuyahoga County Consumer Population and Psychiatric Services as a representative to the Animus Board of Cuyahoga County. I'm not a scholarly, educated man, but in my life, when a decision is to be made, 3 things have to be available: an understanding of the problem, an understanding of the remedy, and the ability to make an effective change. I'm here to speak to those 3 elements to this City Council to consider when deliberating on the equitable distribution of funds now made available through the passage of Issue 1. On behalf of every consumer in the largest per capita county population in Ohio, which receives the lowest per capita allotment of state funding and has endured drastic and severe annual cuts to their support and recovery system for much greater than a decade, please take heart to what you're going to hear. I'm the victim of horrendous parental child abuse. It destroyed my capability to trust. Father infected onlookers with lies. Mothers denied onlookers the truth. I received blame. It went undetected. I was afraid. I used drugs. I sold drugs. I went insane. I received recovery. I got married. I was nearly beaten to death. I lost my job. I lost my home. I lost my car. I lost my dignity. I lost my self-respect. I lost my will to live. I attempted suicide. My wife left me. I went insane again. I took 18 pills a day. I was hospitalized 60 plus times. I was treated by dozens of doctors. I tried to commit suicide again 6 times. I was told recovery was unlikely. I was arrested 17 times. I went to jail. That was the part about understanding the problem, now understanding the remedy. Anger, resentment, and complacency were the greatest impediments to achieving normalcy. I projected anger protected anger from the past like one would a lover. It should never be assumed that the abnormal sense of emotional control justifies being strapped down and pumped with drugs. I carried resentment into the present for the removal of my freedom of choice. It should never be assumed that the hatred of control is unjustified. I naively pass complacency into the future. It should never be assumed that mental illness cannot become an addictive behavior. We are generally seen as people who have removed ourselves from society because of incompetency. I contend that society has distanced itself from us because of an exaggerated advertised fear. Lastly, the ability to make change demands recognition. Present treatment is based upon textbook definitions and not individualized personalities. Psychiatrists and clinicians isolate themselves behind shatterproof glass and locked doors. Psychiatric unit rules and governing law interfere with established coping mechanisms, disrupting normal routine. Many affordable housing programs and available clinic sites are located in violent neighborhoods and criminalized environments. A vast number of consumers are well below the federal poverty guideline levels. Criminalized system abuses presented by professional patients strain the critical resources allocated for recovery services. Stigmatizing and stereotyping are as common as the laws prohibiting them. Dear councilpersons, there is a gap between the ailing infrastructure of our local mental health system and the completely comprehensive cure for mental illness that money cannot affect. But we can strategize optimized opportunity. Not a single item listed on the 13-page document recently presented to your council by Mr. Denahan regarding our need is important. They're essential. They're essential to an orderly society. They're essential to a peaceful society. They're essential to a productive society. They're essential to a complete spiritual principle I hold dear to my heart. A lasting society is based on love for its people. If I'm not mistaken, the Adams Board has requested an additional $16 million increase above the already approved annual county funding levels. Councilpersons, I humbly ask, please dig deeper, double that amount. Even this is below the estimated total need to effectively heal those of little recourse. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very moving comments.
Next is Jeff Pollock.
And we are given 3 minutes, and then the bell rings, if you could kind of wound up, okay, and summarize. We don't cut you off right at 3 minutes, but
All
you
right,
can kind of
thank you.
summarize.
I'll be brief.
Okay.
My name is Jeff Pollock. I'm an attorney with McDonald Hopkins here in Cleveland, but I serve on the boards of 3 agencies that are related to mental health and the drug and addiction use: Recovery Resources, Magnolia Clubhouse, and NAMI of Greater Cleveland. So I'm here in that capacity as an interested citizen and an attorney committed to these issues. First of all, I would urge the council, if I understand correctly, there's approximately 13 to 15% you have in reserves. And we would urge that you keep the reserve to a 10% level, and that would free up 3 to 5% of additional monies, which translates to about $7 to $10 million toward these purposes. And the Public Assistance Fund also, if I understand correctly, has about $30 million in it, and monies could be used from that. The Adams Board request is $16.1 million, and we urge you to consider that and evaluate each of those items in that request. I'm here to address specific selected programs from among those that they have requested a budget for, primarily in the area of prevention. You know, as we all know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And the programs that they're recommending, the Adams Board, are toward a targeted population of those with mental illness or substance abuse problems. So they have detectable symptoms, but they're not really diagnosed yet with a diagnosable level. And research is developing all the time that mental illness and substance abuse can be prevented, and there are effective programs to do that. and the costs are substantially less in prevention, obviously, than the cost of the programs themselves. Just a couple of examples of some of the programs in the prevention area that the Adams Board is recommending. First is a mental health and substance abuse campaigns. These are public campaigns to increase awareness among the public of these issues, integrating health, and physical health and mental health, providing information of the signs and symptoms. Also a recommendation that there be education on opiates and heroin. As we all know, this is a huge problem in our society, especially among young people, but also older adults as well. So these programs are directed toward prevention of heroin and opiate abuse, both for middle-aged men and also for younger people. And one of the programs, I'll be very brief, is to expand the school-based mental health and addiction services in the schools. Right now, there's a program in the Cleveland schools, but the recommendation is to expand that to 8 school districts in the county. And finally, one program that I will also mention too, called Peer Support in the Mental Health Arena. And this is a program where those people who have mental illness or have had mental illness but have recovered can act as peers, a one-on-one peer support service to those with mental illness. So those are selected examples of the budget that the Adams Board has recommended, and we urge your consideration and adoption. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next is Melanie Falls.
We note Ms. Simon and Mr. Rogers are here.
Madam Chair, my name is Melanie Falls. I'm the Executive Director for Applewood Centers in Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm here representing Cuyahoga County's Coalition for Youth, which includes Applewood Centers, Beechbrook, Belfair, Cleveland Christian Home, Catholic Charities, and Ohio Guidestone. Together, we represent the county agencies that provide residential care for the county's most seriously disturbed children. I'm here to advocate in these budget hearings for the insertion of a regular yearly increase for our agencies in our per diem for residential and foster care. The daily cost of treating just one of these needy children in a residential facility in 2001 had a shortfall between reimbursement and the actual cost of treatment of $45 a day. In 2013, that shortfall has risen to $137 a day per child. We can no longer keep moving in this direction and provide the care and the treatment that the children in our care, Cuyahoga County's children in our care, need. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to address you, and I hope you'll consider our request.
Thank you very much.
Next is Judge Tim McMonigle.
Good afternoon. I am former Judge Tim McMonigle. I'm still Tim McMonigle, but I'm former as a judge. Former Common Pleas judge for a number of years and Court of Appeals. Currently, I serve as a private citizen and am involved in a task force at the Adams Board on criminal justice. Currently, we being Cuyahoga County, are woefully underfunded. I've always wanted to use the word woefully in a sentence, and I finally got a chance. We're underfunded at the $34 million. When you compare us to Franklin County, who is funded at $58 million, we spend about $27 per capita to cover about 50% of the people in need of mental health and alcohol and drug services, whereas most of the other counties, major urban counties, are really taking care of about between 75 and 85%. And for instance, Summit County per capita is $59, which is significantly more than our 27. So that you understand, the Common Pleas Court does have a mental health court and a drug court. The drug court is patterned after the Cleveland Municipal Court Drug Court, which has been carrying on very successfully and provided a wonderful model for the Common Pleas Court. The Mental Health Court currently is supervising between 900 and 1,000 seriously mentally ill people, and they're receiving services through the auspices and enforced by the court. The average stay of a mentally ill defendant is about 3 years, and that's assuming that they're not sent to a correction institution. Each year, we're identifying about 300 new seriously mentally ill. So that you understand, when I'm saying seriously mentally ill, I mean at the absolute minimum, there is a psychosis involved. Keep in mind that many of the people we are servicing are, through the court, are charged with very serious crimes. This is the only mental health court in the state of Ohio that treats all felonies, up to and including aggravated murder, but not capital murder. Most of the others are diversionary courts. We are not a diversionary court. Anyone who is eligible is assigned to a mental health court judge, of which there are 5, and they are volunteers. The population served is either under or unemployed. Many are homeless, and a large, very large number are what we refer to as dual diagnosed, which means they have a serious mental illness and they are also alcohol or drug dependent, and let's be honest, they're all indigent and not eligible for even the expansion of Medicaid. I guess what we are really concerned about is if there's money available, and we understand that there is, that it be put to a proper use. Our current funding is so underfunded that anything that we could get close to the 16 million would help fund a couple of things that we don't have now. Crisis intervention training. Only about 15% of the Cleveland Police Department have been crisis intervention trained. That's to be considered a crisis intervention certified first responder, you need 35%. So that would be expanded. And what we really need is a detox center which would go along with the mental health intervention that occurs on the street, and a place to stabilize people in crisis. So if you can see your way, everything that we can get in excess of what we hear is the current allocation and what may be available would certainly be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Next is Harvey Snyder.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Judge Connolly, members of the council. My name is Harvey Snyder. I am the chairperson of the Adams Board of Cuyahoga County. I was previously appointed under the administration of Governor Bob Taft. I was then reappointed under the administration of Governor Strickland, and I have just been reappointed by the administration of Governor Kasich to the board of to a membership on the board of the Adams Board. Where I'm coming from, I have also been previously the president of NAMI Ohio, NAMI Greater Cleveland. I served on the board of Jewish Family Service, served on the board, the advisory board of St. Joseph's Christian Life Center, also known as the Retreat House when it was in existence. I want to thank you for the opportunity to come before you today. I am an attorney and have seen people involved on all sides of the issues involved here, and I would like to say to you that I am deeply grateful on behalf of the board for the hard work all of you do in respect to funding this critical area, and we want to thank you profoundly for we know how hard you work in protecting the taxpayers' money and also on providing the necessary and critical services. So on behalf of my board and the staff of the Adams Board, we want to thank you again. But I would like to call your attention to how hard we all worked just recently for the passage of the Health and Human Services levy. If you recall, in the advertising for that particular levy, we indicated the word mental health, and we came close to almost having a dedicated mental health levy. That is something that's still in the background in my mind. I would like to thank you again and remind you that there is, we believe to be, an excess of money that could be freed up, which we believe would be up to $7 to $10 million. We believe that the voters of this county, the voters who voted on the levy, want to see public programs, and we hope that the council agrees with that. We feel the voters resoundingly want that to take place. I must confess that I am a concerned parent who says that, and to you quite candidly, that crisis intervention centers are very necessary and deeply underfunded. I'd like to remind you that so many of our agencies and providers have so much involved in uncompensated time that they do not get paid for because they can't hire what I would call intake people, social workers, and different various administrators to work for them. Again, I want to say thank you and ask you, please think about housing as one of the most necessary and deeply needed areas of concern. Housing has been an area that has been undermined and not funded. If people don't have housing, they can't get better and they don't recover. We ask that you consider the housing area as applying at least $1.8 million towards the housing so that rental subsidies can be provided to over 500 adults and serve them and serve our community so that they can be productive members and taxpayers. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon, and good luck in your deliberations. We hope you're successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider.
Next is Judy Peters.
Knee injury, so I apologize for the long time it took me to get up here. Good afternoon, Council President Conley, Vice President Brady, and council members. My name is Judy Peters, and I am the past chair of the Mental Health Addiction and Advocacy organization called MAC. The MAC is a statewide member organization with over 90 member organizations that exemplify the diversity of community organizations which have an interest in behavioral health. These organizations include health and human service organizations, the faith-based community, government entities, advocacy organizations, courts, major medical institutions, the corporate arena, and behavioral health agencies serving adults and children. The MAC was formed to bring these groups together and unify these diverse local voices. Our member organizations see every single day in their each diverse setting the impact of untreated behavioral health or disorders. Our hospital members see it in the emergency rooms. Our child-serving organizations see it in the children they serve who are failing and their parents who need treatment. Our faith-based members see it in their congregants and the communities that they serve. Our courts see it in the people who stand before them again, and again. All of our members see the impact of untreated mental illness and addiction disorders daily. They also know that treatment, if people can get it, works, and people can recover. Within the past several months, we have had open and frank discussions about the importance of and the need for services, and we see many reasons for that, unfortunately. One sad reason for the growing discussion is the recent tragedies in our country that have brought us to our knees. Another reason is the increasing understanding of the value of treatment in bending the cost curve. Another reason is the lessening of the terrible stigma that used to cloak any such conversation in hushed hallways. And finally, we mustn't forget the generosity of the Cuyahoga County citizens who not only supported one of our HHS levies, but increased their support so that more people in need can have access to services. We have an opportunity right now, right this very minute, to change this and right this ship. We can stop people from spending countless hours in emergency rooms, unemployment waiting lines, criminal courts, homeless shelters, and countless other places they shouldn't be, simply by getting them access to treatment. Please help us to help. We need your help. We need significant funding in behavioral health services to try and change this and right this ship. Again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Peters.
Next is Steve Morse.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Morse, Madam President, members of the council. I'm with Recovery Resources and currently president of the Council of Agency Directors, which is a group that includes all of the contract agencies of the Adams Board. About 70 agencies currently serving many thousands of Cuyahoga County citizens. I would like to quote for you something that Dale Miller wrote, Councilman Dale Miller wrote in April, when he was studying the needs in our county. And this is not copyrighted yet, so I'm allowed to quote it without permission. He said, "Resources are lacking to do good preventive work. We're not seeing people early enough to make interventions that would prevent more serious problems later." He made 15 points, and I'm just mentioning a few of them. However, there are numerous services that are needed that Medicaid doesn't cover. The most pressing of these is supportive housing, and you've heard that mentioned earlier, where there's more than 1,000 people in the mental health community on waiting lists for supportive housing. Other important services not covered by Medicaid include supported employment and peer support. There's a great need for, I'm still quoting Councilman Miller here, there's a great need for residential treatment slots for alcohol and drug addiction treatment, particularly for the non-reentry population. And his conclusion, which we all agree with, is better access to mental health and addiction services will strengthen our community, save money in the long run. Now is the right time to find ways to better meet these needs. And the members of our council were disappointed, frankly, when the proposal to have a dedicated behavioral health levy failed in this council by one vote. However, our attitude turned around and optimism reigned when the Health and Human Services levy was put on the ballot at a replacement level, and it passed. Now, we rolled up our sleeves, we stretched to help make this happen, along with many others. What we're asking is that you stretch in the use of funds that are available to come close to meeting the needs, as close as possible to meeting the needs that we've identified. Recently, last week, Recovery Resources had its annual benefit event, and we were privileged to have speaking to us the family, mother, father, sister, and brother of an upstanding young man, a veteran of the Afghanistan conflict, who came home and died of a heroin overdose. There was not a dry eye in the house, as you can imagine. We believe that the time for tears is ended, and we need to do all that we can to prevent senseless tragedies like that from happening anymore to the citizens of our county. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And finally, Mario Tanti.
President Connolly, members of the council, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I am Mario Tanti, the senior advisor for Beachbrook. Beachbrook is a 161-year-old child welfare and mental health agency, which last year served over 24,000 children and families from throughout Northeast Ohio. Central to our mission is the idea that we must advance the well-being and self-sufficiency of these children and families. We accomplish this by providing residential treatment, foster care, early intervention and prevention, and school-based mental health services. The staff and board of directors of Beachbrook are pleased that the Health and Human Services levy was supported by the majority of our friends and neighbors in Cuyahoga County. The cuts to vital services which would have happened had the levy failed would have been devastating. and to the most vulnerable among us. As you consider the budget request before you, we ask that you support the children of Cuyahoga County through funding early intervention, prevention, and mental health programs that are proven to have real impact and save the taxpayer dollars in the future. This clearly must be balanced with the real and critical needs of the children that we serve who did not have the benefit of these early intervention programs. Children in our residential programs, some of which you have visited, need intensive treatment and intervention. Through a strong partnership between the Department of Children and Family Services and the Cuyahoga County Coalition for Youth, the number of children who have received the highest end services have decreased dramatically in the recent years of Cuyahoga County. That's great news for all of us, but the needs of those who remain and the cost that treat them have increased. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tante. Is there anyone else?
Madam Chair, no, there is not.
Okay, thank you. We have some other items on the agenda before we get to the budget items. So if you'd like to read, we'll go on to item 4, matters referred to the committee. Item 2013-0244.
Resolution number 2013-0244, a resolution authorizing a termination and transfer agreement with Merchandise Mart Properties Incorporated, MMPI Cleveland Development LLC, and Cleveland MMCC LLC, authorizing other actions related to the agreement, authorizing the county executive to execute the agreement and all other documents consistent with this resolution, and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
I believe Mr. Applebaum is here to speak on this. So this is an ongoing process that we've talked about before, and so you're going to talk about the manner in which we're going to terminate this relationship with MMPI and start with the new organization. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you for that succinct summary, probably better than I can do.
Yeah, I know. We try to be succinct here.
Some of us. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about the terms of this agreement. This has been almost a year in the making, and I'm going to give you some real detail as to where we're at, what this is all about. So initially, I want to talk about the reasons for termination and transfer. Why are we discontinuing our relationship with MMPI now that the development is complete, and why are we moving on to a different arrangement? There's several reasons for this. First of all, it became apparent actually quite a while ago, probably as many as a year and a half, 2 years ago, that MMPI, while they worked well with us as a developer, their capability and capacity to be the operator we were looking for the Global Center and the Convention Center were really being reduced. They made a conscientious decision to start to diminish their presence in the industry, to reduce their national staff, and they really started to discontinue their long-term interest in the so-called Mart business. You may recall there was a point in time, probably in 2011, when Chris Kennedy, the CEO, left the company, when MMPI started to divest of various of its properties, and where the parent Vornado stopped emphasizing MMPI as part of its core mission. At the same time this was going on, we started to look at, we have a 15-year relationship under that lease. What are the opportunities for future growth? Is this really the organization that we need to deal with? And quite honestly, there were performance concerns. We had in our deal certain obligations they had to meet to show first-class state-of-the-art operations, and we became concerned as to their ability to do that and as to their efforts to do that. It didn't get to the point of a default, but it came to a point of great concern, and we had a lot of discussions about the way they were performing and how they were looking to be able to perform. At the same time that was going on, we started to investigate what our alternatives were, and we saw that we had greatly enhanced opportunities with other entities. We looked into the possibility of having a substitute entity come in and operate the facility. Ultimately, we went through a selection process along with MMPI, and as you all know, we've identified SMG as a replacement operator working on behalf of a third-party entity, which I'll get into. As contrasted with MMPI, SMG is a best-in-class national management company. They have a tremendous record of operating these facilities, much improved marketing and operational capabilities, ability to attract and retain national convention business. So it was a question of MMPI versus a possible replacement. Moreover, though, we determined that if we did step out of this deal, the deal, by the way, and this is a deal that I inherited and that you inherited. Not to say that at the outset it's unknown what might have happened. It was before all of us were involved. There may not have been a better deal available at the time, but the point is there's a much better deal available now. And as you're about to see in a few minutes, I'm going to present a deal to you that, compared to the deal with MMPI, involves a fully transparent management agreement. It involves a deal where we're going to have annual savings of $3 to $4.5 million per year, and that actually, it could even be beyond that, plus the fact that we're going to have increased capital repair contributions. Economically, it's a much better model, and I'm going to take you through the model in some detail because you need to understand this. And also, we will now have a coordinated business model. As we're doing the Convention Center Hotel, what occurs here? Well, we're creating a hotel which is going to drive revenues into the Convention Center. Under the model that we're going to have with the pure operator, as we drive those revenues into the Convention Center, those revenues are realized by the county. They become our revenues available for reinvestment as we choose. Under the other model with the private developer there, if we drove those revenues into MMPI, they just pocket the revenues because they were entitled to all the revenues with no corresponding obligation to do anything really different. So this is a much more collaborative model where the hotel operator and the convention center operator are in sync, as you'll see in a few minutes. So with that in mind, let me just give you a little bit of insight into the negotiations. And I normally don't do this to a great degree, but I think now that we're done, it's something that you should know. We actually commenced negotiations in the late summer, fall of 2012. At that point in time, we were becoming increasingly concerned with MMPI's performance, and we started to talk about the possibility of completing the project, the development, but maybe looking to another method of operations. MMPI's position was that while it wasn't central to their business anymore, they were quite content to operate this for the next 15 years. And here's the reason why. It was their belief that they could pull about more than $5 million a year in profits out of the project. Their view was they would do that for 15 years, and they thought that just that profit pool alone had a present value of approximately $50 million. So they did not want to walk away from present value of $50 million in profits, over $75 million over 15 years of profit. They wanted to retain their own operator. Like they would have retained SMG, except for our document, our contract precluded them from doing that. They could have sold it, but our contract precluded them from doing that. We didn't want to give them the advantage of basically being a middleman, being a caretaker. So they made a proposal to us, because they did also, ultimately, they would like to exit, because this was not their core business, and their demand was that we pay them $20 million in cash, which in their view is just a fraction, although a large fraction of the future value, and obviously release them from their tenant improvement and contribution responsibility since they'd be stepping out of the deal. We did respond, and we said, subject to council approval, we said, we'll release you because we want you to go away. We'll assume your tenant improvement responsibility because you're no longer there to receive rents, and we'll adjust your contribution responsibility because certain things that they had to contribute to ended up being actual capital costs in the project. And by the way, we'll do that provided that provided there's contingency dollars to pay for it, which by the way there are. That was not a problem, but we offered a cash payment of $0. So we were a little bit far apart at that point in time. To make a long story short, negotiations continued for a month. By April of this year, their cash demand dropped to $10 million. We continued to negotiate. On the day that we did the ribbon cutting, you may remember on the dais there was a new individual from Vornado from New York. He came in that day actually to continue the negotiations. He had a best and final of $6 million by June. Ultimately, we settled this for a termination and transfer fee of $3 million. So that is pretty much, I mean, that is where we are today. The termination transfer fee is $3 million. And as you're going to see in a minute, this presents a great opportunity for us economically. So today, we've gone through, and there are deal documents that I believe you now have copies of. There was the initial letter of intent dated August 1, 2013. There's a supplemental or supplement to the letter of intent dated November 15th. There is the ultimate document, which is the termination and transfer agreement, which we now have signed by MMPI, subject to your approval. We have the management agreement between the MMPI entity and SMG, dated November 15, 2013, which we had to do it that way, but that will transfer to our benefit. And then there are miscellaneous amended and restated project agreements, too numerous to get into. All the old documents, the lease, the sublease, all those deals had to be they had to be amended and restated to accommodate the new deal. And that's a lot of detail and legal work, but it's really it doesn't rise to the level of thinking about the terms of the deal. That's the background that allows it to take place. So let's talk about the deal structure. What happens under this deal is initially the county and MMPI did enter into an interim agreement under a letter of intent, and that actually started this transition. It started in August through November, all subject ultimately to county approval. MMPI entered into a management agreement with SMG. We oversaw the selection of the new manager, and it required our approval, and we oversaw basically the management agreement because it was subject to our approval, and that agreement is done, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a few minutes. But technically right now that's entered into with MMPI because they have to be in place during this interim period, which they were. They started actually on Monday. So SMG is actually in effective operation of the facility. That could all be reversed, but in essence they're in effective operation of the facility right now. What then occurs is the county terminates its contract with MMPI, whose role is then assigned to a newly formed not-for-profit, which we'll talk about, and because to be descriptive, this doesn't have to be the name of it. I've termed this new entity the Cuyahoga County Convention Facilities Development Corporation, because that's what it is, with the nifty CCC FDC. Maybe we can come up with something better, but that is the current term for the entity right now, because it is our Convention Facility Development Corporation. And ultimately what then happens, as soon as this agreement becomes effective, the SMG contract is transferred to that entity, and they manage, SMG manages the facility. They are the steward of the county's funds through this entity, and they undertake all the management responsibility on behalf of this development corporation. The deal terms. Well, step one. So we started this interim arrangement, and from August to November, we basically said to MMPI, we'll start the transition, but even before we do the deal, we want you to stop taking profit out of the project. So the agreement was that from August to November, in good faith, that we would have a deal done. Now this is subject to reversal. All rent and revenue that they would otherwise receive, the rent that we pay them and the revenues they would otherwise receive, that basically went into an operating fund. And for a period of time, which is through a portion of August and a portion of November, that fund accumulated $3.7 million. During that same interim period, all expenses that were accrued were paid out of the fund. And the amount that is paid out of the fund during the interim period is $2.7 million. So during this 4-month period, there was a net operating balance of $958,000. Normally, that money would go to MMPI. This is the money they would put into their pocket. But they agreed as part of the transition that during this interim period that they would forego any profit during the interim period. And the reason they agreed to do that is we insisted that if we did this transition, that they pay the cost of oversight and the cost of the transition. So that fund, which otherwise would have been their money, is available to take care of all the costs of transition. And that's all of the due diligence. That's the fact that conventional wisdom is basically overseeing the project during the interim period. It's their costs. It's all the legal costs. And then there's money left over from that fund, which will also be used to pay a portion of the transfer fee. So during the last 4 months, they've actually ceased to make profit on the project, and we've been funding, and this is all already starting the process of open book transparent, as they're absorbing the costs of doing this deal. We also, as I mentioned, commenced SMG services as of November 15th. SMG has effectively commenced management of the facility. MMPI no longer receives any administrative or other fees from the county, and SMG is in full operational control pending the final transfer of the contract to the new entity. So, continuing on, the ultimate closing with MMPI, we've agreed that it has to occur prior to 12/31/2013. We're hoping, obviously, that we do it before that, and that's simply a subject of when the board, when you actually finally agree upon the transaction. It'll occur as soon as you approve it and we sign off, the county executive signs off on the document. So that could be either late November or early December. I think after you have a meeting on the 10th, you have a meeting, I think, on the 26th. It could be either time.
November 26th and December 10th.
December 10th. But it could be either time because we have till the end of the year, but we have to do it before the end of the year. So we make the following payments under this agreement to MMPI. As I already indicated to you, there's a $3 million termination payment on closing. There's an amount not to exceed $200,000, and right now this number looks like it's closer to $120,000. There's certain software licenses and equipment that they own. We could go out in the market and buy it, but we've cut a deal where we could assume their licenses and their agreements. So this is simply purchasing some licenses and equipment they have. There's reimbursement for certain tenant improvements and contributions, and this is taking over TI commitments and some other front-end costs. Now, this is about $3.6 million, but I will tell you that we already have, because an example of this is there's food service equipment that we allowed to, that they use their tenant contribution for, or their MMPI contribution for. That's $1.27 million. That's a project cost. They could have paid for that out of contingency. They're also releasing to us $4 million of their unused contingency. So this is really just a transfer. These are project costs they ultimately would have paid for anyway. We're taking their contingency money back, the $4 million back, and we're agreeing to then make the payment out of money they otherwise would have had to make the payment. So this is sort of a wash. And then finally, we will assume future tenant improvement expenses, but we will also receive all future tenant rents. So we get the rent, and obviously if someone's going to fund tenant improvement expenses going forward, it's us, but we also get all of the rents going forward. MMPI then will transfer all of its interest to this newly formed not-for-profit, which then will assume the SMG contract. So what does this look like economically? Keep in mind what our current deal is. The deal that we inherited was that under the current deal, it was this way. MMPI received both base rent and supplemental rent. And the amount of rental payments they received from the county started at around $9.2 million. And by the end of the 15-year term, that rental payment is over $11 million because it grows at about 3% a year, and there's some other variations. So they get from $9 to $11 million. They also received all the revenues from the facility. So they got the base rent. They also received all the rental payments in the Global Center. They received all the revenues and fees generated by the Convention Center. And that is a number that probably exceeds $5 million a year. In exchange for that, by the way, they paid the expenses. They also had an obligation to pay capital repair expense, but we had an ongoing battle with them about that as well because we think they were underfunding the capital repair expense. They were only, in the first 5 years, by way of example, they were putting $250,000 a year into capital repair in the first 5 years, $500,000 in the second 5 years, and $750,000 in the third 5 years. Our position is that rather than $250,000 in the first 5 years, that number should be above $1.5 million. We think that we want to make a very large contribution to capital repair because we want to keep this facility pristine. And we had an ongoing battle with them because there was a legal requirement that they do it, but the number was a battle between us, and that was one of the issues that we had. Well, under this new deal, we're going to be able to control how much capital goes into the building. So, one more element of this, and then I'll put it all together in a pro forma. What does SMG get in the new deal? As opposed to the $3 to $5 million that MMPI thought they could pull out, SMG is a pure management structure. It's a professional management structure. They get a fixed fee of $155,000 a year. That is increased $10,000 a year for 5 years, and so that ends up around $200,000. They get qualitative incentives that are about 25% of the fixed fee if they earn all of the incentives. So even when this maxes out at 200, that fee will max out at around $250,000 a year. And then there also is a quantitative fee. We have some pretty high benchmarks. If they can produce revenues above those benchmarks, they get 20% of those revenues, which we're delighted by because when we would be getting 80% of the revenues. But we think even in the most maximum, the best case under their pro forma, there will never be a fee that they generate unless things are fabulous beyond our expectation, our wildest expectations, where their fee would ever be more than $500,000 a year, as opposed to $3.5 to $5 million a year, which is what in essence, what we were doing right now under this closed book. And of course, this is all documented on an open book basis, and the revenues are to us. So all the fees and expenses are offset by revenues. So let's take a look at a pro forma. And this is a pro forma which was actually generated by SMG. Now I will tell you, we had competing pro formas from other entities. We created our own pro formas. We had consulting pro formas. They're all relatively consistent. So what I'm going to do on this pro forma is I want you to go out to the first stabilized year, and you can see how revenues build up, and you can see what happens to expenses. But let's go out to about 2017. That's basically when it becomes pretty much stabilized. So first of all, for the convention center, what you see there in the highlighted column is you see that there's income that comes in for the project. You have rental income and service income from the convention center, about $2 million. There's ancillary income because the convention center sells food and beverage. They sell services to the vendors. Now there's some corresponding expense down below. But and there's sponsorships and some other income. But conservatively, the adjusted gross income in 2017 on the pro forma, it stabilizes around $5.6 million a year. From that, there are expenses. So now, starting below that line, you start to see the operating expenses on that page and the next page. And you'll see the total operating expense for 2017 for the convention center alone is about $8.2 million. So with the convention center alone in 2017, we think there will be a loss of about $2.6 million. Now, if we add to that the global center, in 2017, that's when the global center starts to become profitable. And by the way, that grows because you go from deals where for the first few years rent is abated to deals where they start to pay full rent. So in 2017, your revenue minus expenses has a bit of an add. It's $219,000. So you put them both together, and the pro forma says in 2017, there would be a net loss of revenue versus expenses of about $2.38 million. So what does that mean in context? Well, the rent that was due to MMPI to 2017, the amount of supplemental rent and rent that we were going to pay them in 2017 was $9,628,000. That's the rental obligation that we would have paid to MMPI under the existing deal. And by the way, that rent continues to grow to $11 million. So you subtract from that the net loss. So we otherwise would have been out $9.6 million. We're not out 9.6. We keep that. So let's find out how much of that we save. Well, you subtract the net costs that we have to pay, revenue minus expense for the new operator, and we have an initial savings of $7.247 million in 2017. Now, there's certain things that we will adjust that by. Let's assume that the pro forma is off. Let's assume all the pro formas are off, and let's assume they're off by 20%. And we think that we don't think they're off. We think they're conservative. But I'll go the other way by 20%. So we'll put a 20% contingency on the 2.38 savings that we anticipated. So we'll take that off of our savings. Now let's start putting money away for capital reserve. We want to keep this as a pristine facility. Rather than the $250,000 that MMPI was going to put aside in 2017, we're going to put $1.7 million aside. We're always going to have enough money to do everything necessary to keep this as a pristine facility, make improvements, or do whatever else we need to do. And we're setting up a governance entity, just to be conservative. Let's assume that, and by the way, this is just a plug number. Let's assume that the annual cost for the governance entity is $350,000. Okay, and we've done some research and some investigation as to having a good executive director, a good staff member, what that would be. So let's assume it's $350,000, which is the plug number we're using. At that point in time, even taking and increasing our capital reserve sixfold, putting a 20% contingency in, putting aside money for governance, we still in 2017 will save $4.7 million in 1 year beyond the deal that we had with MMPI. I'm going to make one further adjustment. I'm going to say, just to be on the safe side, yet another contingency, we're going to put aside money for tenant improvement and replacement. We may choose to have some folks in the Global Center that we continue to take rent in, and we make capital improvements, and maybe we won't require them to be whole. We'll take a loss on that, on TI, so put $500,000 a year aside for that. With all of these adjustments, the absolute savings would be $4.2 million. Now, I have predicted on an annual basis we'd have savings of $3 to $4.5 million. It's very difficult for me to create pro formas where the savings are only $3 million. I will just tell you that. The potential for savings here is pretty dramatic. Now, we think that this, the savings, there's investments that we think you're going to want to talk about with the savings. But this just shows you the difference between what the deal was with MMPI and what the deal will be that we have negotiated going forward. It is dramatic. Dramatic savings every year. So one last thing that I'm going to show you on this is, as you know, and now this is a little bit of a comparison of an apple and an orange, so I want this to be fair. But as you know, in the MMPI contract, they had certain benchmarks. These were things they had to do to avoid our taking action. There were benchmarks with respect to gross occupancy of the exhibit halls, number of exhibition hall events, number of meetings in the ballrooms and meeting rooms, and the total number of convention center events. Now, I will tell you that in MMPI's case, these were benchmarks. If they didn't meet them, we would take action. Over time, it seemed, though, that MMPI equated these with their obligation. These benchmarks, basically seem to be what they were assuming is what they would do. And of course, this is one of the issues where we became contentious with them. By comparison, I'm showing you the SMG benchmarks. Now, these are incentivized. So if they do better than this, there's some incentives. So it is a little bit of an apple and an orange. But MMPI kind of treated the benchmarks in sort of the same way that SMG is now treating these benchmarks. And what you'll see in most cases, if you look at number of exhibit hall events, number of meeting and ballroom events, total number of convention center events, their benchmarks are almost 100% higher than what MMPI had as their default benchmark. So it's just showing you that we now have terms and conditions in an agreement, because this is now an incentivized management agreement where the production and what we're rewarding is far greater. A couple other comments on this. The whole point of this also is to now incentivize our operator in the right way. What was happening before with MMPI under the original development agreement is they received the $9 to $11 million. And to some degree, if they wanted to spend less, the less they spent, the less they put into operations, the more they saved, the more money they made. This is counterproductive. I mean, this is the wrong incentivization. Under this deal, we agree with SMG on the operations. We want them to staff up, and we want them to have the best people, the proper people. We want them to have a pure management agreement. The more revenue they make, the more they're incentivized, the more we realize, the more we can reinvest. So it is now incentivized the right way. It's also in balance with the hotel project, because now they can work in tandem. No one has an objective to hold profits to themselves or to not collaborate. It's the two working together, so it's a much better system. Now, one last thing I'll talk about here is we do, for this to all work, we are setting up a separate entity, which is this Cuyahoga County Convention Facilities Development Corporation. Why are we doing this? Well, we are doing this, A, because we're required to do it. Under the original financing structure, and we got great benefits from that original financing structure, those Chapter 165 bonds, we've talked about how much money we saved in the past, but to maintain our ability, that tax-exempt status, an entity has to step into the shoes of MMPI, and it has to have a measure of independence from the county. What does that mean? It means that while the county can appoint a majority of the board members, it means that the county cannot control those board members. You could either appoint less than a majority of the board members, and then you would have the right to terminate at will. If you appoint a majority of the board members, once they're appointed, they can only be removed for cause. Okay, so you can't appoint a majority, but once appointed, they serve their term. And you would not have the ability to, in other words, the idea is if you appointed them, didn't like what they're doing, you couldn't simply terminate them. Otherwise, you would have excessive control under the control tests. And by the way, the control tests for independence, there's no one element, there's no bright line test. It's a common sense test of a lot of these elements.
This is actually the second item.
No, it's not.
First time's not. Looks like it's the second item.
Okay.
No, the second item is the cooperative agreement.
Yeah, Mr. Brady wanted to come in.
Just a point of privilege, I guess you say. After all this time, I'm absolutely ready to move on the termination and the transfer agreement. And I congratulate you for what I know must have seemed like a lifetime of negotiations, and I think you did you did a good job for the county. What you're going into this government structure thing now, and you just kind of went into it, and so I just want to ask you one fundamental question, so we know so at least I know we're talking about the same thing.
Sure.
There is a temporary governing board, and then for 60 or 90 days, I think, and then there is permanent. If anything is permanent.
A permanent for the term.
Yes, permanent with terms, which the number of people has not been decided about correctly. This particular document calls for 3 people. Are we talking about right now? Are you talking about the temporary board?
Yes.
Or you are talking about the temporary board? Okay, then just one last question on that, because I didn't mean to interrupt your presentation. This temporary board only has 3 people on it. It's not here in the legislation, but is the idea of an alternate considered if one of the 3 is not available? because it's a small group of people. I think it should be a small group of people, but if it's so small that one person being gone means you can't have a meeting. You see what I'm?
Yes, I do. Let me what I'd like to do, and I apologize for kind of drifting into the governance
No, I just
area.
wanted to separate the two out a little bit.
Let me take a half a step back on the governance. Number one, the requirement on the governance entity is simply that it be in place by the time of the transfer, because there has to be something to transfer to, just to make that clear. What we tried to do, and I know that there's been, I've had some separate conversations on the governance entity, and I know some of the thoughts about this. So what we tried to do is, this is a temporary board. By the way, there are draft articles of incorporation and draft rules which Joe Nani has, and he can share them with you. It's not the final work in process, but you can look at the draft documents of the articles of incorporation. Let me tell you what they say right now. Because the concept is that we'll get these 3 board members together, and with whatever assistance they want consultatively, they will then decide on the larger board structure. And by the way, as a default in the agreement, I indicated in the agreement that I think I said that the permanent board could be up to 9 board members. The more board members you have, the more unwieldy it is. I think the original impression when we tried to think about a board, I think I had it at 7, but it's with the majority appointed by the county. And then we had a couple other community partners that we thought were logical, but we said, you know what, we're not going to decide that. We'll let the board members decide how that's going to work. All the initial board is going, and there is a provision in that agreement that any decisions on structure on the permanent board, while there's 3 board members, of those 3, it does say that on structural issues, the representative of the county executive and the representative of the president of council that's assigned, they have to agree on that. So those 2 individuals have to sign off on any permanent board structure under this document. There is a provision, there may be a provision in the articles that do talk about what happens if someone cannot serve. I mean, they're typical articles, and we could go through there, and we can certainly make sure all those are in the the code of regulations and the articles of incorporation. So there is detail. It's pretty typical for board structure for a board of this type. But I agree that all should be in there, and these are available to be shared and to get comment on. Once again, the critical thing here is to get the initial board set up, to get the thing incorporated, the initial board set up. That initial board can make modifications in some of the ways that the board does business, but once again, that would have to be by agreement of the county executive and the council president appointed board members.
Just one follow-up question.
Yes.
I know we don't have to move on this today, but let's say we moved on this today, assuming there's support for it. How soon would the appointments by the executive and the council be made, and how would the other appointments be made?
Well, right now, the thought was, we wanted to, and I'll just be, to be very, just as transparent as I can be about this. We were thinking about who would be likely candidates for a non-county appointed board member. And, there have been various entities that have had relationships with the project and have been supportive in different ways, and their support's important. In the private, first of all, ultimately, it may be appropriate to talk about in a larger board, City of Cleveland. It may be appropriate to talk about, and we talked about a few different possible partners, an appointee, we talked about perhaps by GCP. We talked about Positively Cleveland because they work, with this board extensively. Bioenterprise or someone from the medical community because of the Global Center. But what we decided for this purpose is we thought after some conversation with some folks that we would ask GCP and Positively Cleveland to jointly select one member. So we've reached out to them, and I believe if asked, they would promptly pick or select their member. In terms of the members that the county executive and council president would select, it has to be done, let me say it this way, if you authorize the county executive to enter into these agreements, that board has to be set up to accept the transfer. So if by way of example, let's say that you did it, let's say it came out of this committee and you did it on the 26th or say the 10th. You'd authorize it on the 10th. We have to close it before the end of the year. So, you'd have a little bit of time to pick that member so that the entity would be set up and we could have the closing before the end of the year, if that helps.
Madam President,
Mr.
one question. The Section 2 tells us that the 3 board members would create the permanent board. If this Section 2 was not included, would that power then still rest with this council to create the board, or where would that power lie?
Well, effectively, what would occur is it's a little bit of a catch-22. This entity has to be independent. So the entity would be set up, and you would indicate your displeasure with the entity by not approving the transfer and the termination and transfer agreement. We don't think in terms of the county setting up the entity. We think in terms of the county appointing board members to the entity, because once again, the entity has to be independent of the county.
Okay. Mr. Greenspan?
Great. On the discussion of the governance, I have some other questions on the other matters, but on the question of governance.
You only get 3.
I,
Well, he said
the bylaws in here, whether, just talks about the initial and the interim are appointed by this 3-person board, and then this 3-person board would then appoint and come up with the rules for the permanent board. Is that correct?
That they would set up the rules for appointment. Now, what they may establish would be that the county, by way of example, that board may say that it's a 7-person board, and they may say that the county selects 4 of the 7 members.
But they being the 3-person board would make.
The 3-person board. Now, if that
make
board
offers.
says that the county selects 4, that board is not going to tell the county how to select its 4. You're back to your question about how the county selects.
Yeah, right, yeah. That's why I'm curious why, and maybe it fails the independence test, why council without the approval of the executive would not approve all bylaws, permanent or interim, articles, all corporate governance documents.
It gets into the issue of the independence test. And Majid can also comment on this, but we have been talking with bond counsel about this, and I will tell you at every step of the way what we do, even with ideas that you will suggest, we kind of discuss them with bond counsel to get an understanding of how what could violate the independence test. And there's a question of how much control you can exert before you violate the independence test. And of course, if you violate the independence test, the penalty is severe. The penalty would be literally loss of millions of dollars because you'd violate the tax exempt status of the bonds.
But if we're not telling them how to operate, merely laying out the framework as to what is acceptable, how do we violate the independence?
Well, it depends on what you want to do.
Well, if we were to set up the bylaws, if they were to recommend bylaws, we approve them. That's how they're to operate. they come forward and say, we want the board to be 7 members, as an example. They're going to be quarterly, however their structure, their bylaws, their articles are set up, how voting membership and so forth. But they operate completely in an independent fashion. And how does that violate the independence perspective?
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is I don't claim to be the expert in how far you can go on the independence test. We do rely on bond counsel for that, and I think that if we're going to have if as part of this exercise, and by the way, let me say that I believe that independently you can approve of the transaction subject to your asset, your assent on the governance. But I really think that for that conversation, if you want to get into some of the scenarios or hypotheticals of that, I would really feel more comfortable if I have bond counsel at my side, because I don't claim to know how far you can go. I'm not sure that it's a science either. I don't know.
No, I mean, that's the one thing. Neither Jeff nor I are experts in this area, and we keep going back to bond counsel on this. But I would ask counsel to conceptually just think of this for a second, because it's hard sometimes to put your head around it. The very reason this entity is coming into existence is because we need a private entity in the place of MMPI. You have a private entity in place right now that you have very little control over, and it is being replaced. If we can exert all those powers, we would do it ourselves without having this entity in place to start with. We're obligated by tax law to have this entity in place for those reasons, and every time you go a step further of we're already controlling the number of the board members. Every incremental additional step, it becomes a more problematic issue in terms of the amount of independence. So if you're saying they need our approval for all their bylaws, you're practically saying we're writing them for them because we won't approve any bylaws or any bylaws changes unless it becomes, to what extent does that entity have its own mind and control? And that's where a lot of these issues come in play. And again, I don't either claim to be the expert on this. It's tax law is beyond me. We have to always keep going back. But it is a very complex issue. But I just want to make sure, again, this is an entity that is replacing MMPI. This is not an entity. We're not out there creating a public entity like a Convention Facilities Authority or something of that nature. We have a private developer, we have a private entity, and we're replacing it with another private entity.
Well,
and also keep in mind, we have contracts with that entity, so that entity is responsible to us.
Well, is there another example of this type of structure in our current government?
I
that
don't
we can
know.
draw as an example?
I don't know.
Because,
I don't know what other entities
one more question.
utilize the Chapter 165 bonds. But what I would
Can we find that out? Because
Yeah.
there's got to be a comfort level here. We're asking to give up effectively control of a $500 million asset. And then my next question has to do with the relationship between the Convention Center Hotel and the discussion between coordination between the two facilities. If this is a separate entity and the discussion was revolving around coordination of the two activities, if they're not able to, how's that going to work?
I'll say, let me make two comments. First of all, on this particular conversation, and I don't know if it's in another council hearing or some separate one-on-one conversations, I would recommend that we have bond counsel involved, because you'll ask me a series of questions and I will continue to try to invoke bond counsel. Because here's the other issue. Even if I have my own opinion, I'm going to rely on bond counsel's opinion on this. So at this point in time, we're not yet saying that this entity, while it's conceivable that if we have a well-run, successful entity, and if everyone's comfortable with that entity, while it's conceivable that for coordination purposes, while it's conceivable that ultimately we would assign the hotel contract to that entity, we're not compelled to do that. That's a possibility, but we could exist without doing that at all. We have to do this for the convention center. We don't have to do it for the hotel. If we do it for the convention center and the entity functions well and everyone is happy with it and thinks this is a great thing, we can assign the hotel to it, but we don't have to. So that's a future discussion. And frankly, I think that it's worthwhile, we don't have to think about that operation contract for the hotel until the time that it's, close to operating, after it's built. So we would have the opportunity to set this entity up, watch how it progresses, and then make that decision later on.
And the one thing, it just sort of, I keep saying this, but sometimes it's hard to wrap somebody's head around, in the sense, we are, the phrase, we're giving up control. We have MMPI in place right now. We have no control over its board meetings, its bylaws, how its board is appointed. If anything, that transaction is actually giving the county more control by giving us appointment authority over its board members. So by taking that transaction, we're actually gaining control, not giving up any control. And we have to keep in mind that this is a private entity and has to stay private entity for tax law.
Thank you.
Madam President.
Mr. Schrein, then Mr. Miller.
Yeah, the law directors, to Mr. Greenspan, we gave up control, at least my understanding, years ago when we gave it up to
That's fine.
MMPI. So we're not giving up something. We're actually gaining, at least the way, my understanding. You might not be gaining, as we used to say in law school, you don't gain the whole basket of sticks, but at least we've gotten some more of the sticks back in our control package than we ever had when we gave it up to MMPI.
And the one thing we're definitely getting back is the money.
Right, well, that's the basket of sticks I really like the most, to be honest. And
I thought you would.
yeah, and as I said to our county council president here, that I think it's imperative that we have a bond counsel here so that you don't have to be the one to answer these questions. I think it's really imperative that we have a presentation from bond counsel, because we're walking into an area with such risk if we don't do it right. And the exposure will come back and just slam this council. If we don't have the professional standing there right next to you explaining us all the I's to be dotted and the T's to be crossed. But one of the things that you threw out to us on this control aspect is you threw out the two options that this council, I believe, is going to have to make the choice. That is, do we go with a majority of seats potentially in whatever this new structure is going to be, or do we go with a minority of seats whereby we do exercise more control, but the numbers are not necessarily going to be in the majority side? Which do you recommend, and where do you think the bond counsel will come out on that?
I would recommend, bond counsel, by the way, they will be agnostic on that.
Okay.
But I recommend that you do appoint the majority of the members, because once again, you should have confidence in who you appoint. It is true that during a term, you could only remove them for cause. But on the other hand, there will be a term. That term may be a 3-year term. So it's not like you have someone in there that will serve indefinitely, and at the end of a 3-year term, you'll have the right as a body to make another, or let me say it this way, the county will have the right to make an appointment. So there's a limitation on the term. You can have a majority of the appointees without violating the control test. To have a minority of members, how often do you really appoint someone and then yank them without cause anyway? I mean, you're going to be appointing good people. They're going to see a fiduciary obligation. I wouldn't be concerned about having extraordinary control over an individual. Appoint them, let them serve their term.
I was just curious as to why you went one way or the other, the majority with no control other than cause, or the minority where you actually control those seats. So I'm just...
Because those are the options bond counsel presented to us.
Right, okay. And I'm just curious as to why you recommended the one versus the other. And then this county has some challenges with boards that sit and seem to sit sometimes. And so that's really where I'm coming down from as far as concerned. And I assume when this structure is set up, it can be put in place so that they don't all run with concurrent terms on the initial. We can stagger those, just kind of like our county.
The current document you have in front of you has staggered terms. I believe it has 3-year terms, and I think they're staggered. So you have constantly people coming off and going on, or potential for them to come off and go on.
Are we at liberty to challenge the business model questions that you threw out here? Because my concern on your couple points where you had a percentage of occupancy out there in regards to this. What's going to happen when we open a hotel in 2017? You saw the trend line looks like it's going straight up
in 16, 17, 18, in that ballroom use, which is one of the major revenue producers, and we're going to have a ballroom sitting right next to that. Is that factored into these trend lines?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, SMG will tell you that the hotel, the ballroom is just one element of the convention center. The thing that's going to happen when that hotel opens up is having those 600 hotel rooms is going to drive business into the convention center. The fact that there's a ballroom there is not going to it's going to be a net gain in business. And SMG and Hilton will all absolutely swear to that based on their experience.
All right, we have Mr. Miller and Mr. Jones, and we do have another item, but so we need to sort of capsulize this. So go ahead and ask your question, and we can kind of wrap this up. Because we're not going to vote on it today, and I'm sure other people have questions and kind of get on information overload here.
Madam President, I just want to say that I have a problem with comparing MMPI to the new entity. You know, as I understand it, SMG replaces MMPI, not the new entity, and the new entity performs more of a public function, and even though it's nonprofit, and I just want to call my colleagues' attention to the amendment that I'm going to propose that would require the entity to follow the open meetings and public records ordinances of the county. Since we're not voting on this today, we don't need to deal with the amendment today, but I just want people to be aware of it and be thinking about it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Jones?
Well, Councilman Miller stated as a fact. What I was going to ask is a question. Was SMG actually MMPI's replacement? So you've just elevated my thinking in that obviously there is a gain in authority now as a result. So my question is probably a little similar to Councilman Schron's. Since there is a gain, how should this power be divided now? And should the permanent board be made now? Give me the rationale. Should the permanent board, should we create a temporary board now? And what's the rationale behind a temporary board as opposed to this body creating a permanent board right now?
A few comments. First of all, I would recommend that you not think in terms of this body creating the board. Think in terms of a board structure can be suggested that you would agree to or not agree to. This gets into this issue of sort of the independence of the entity. You have to, so that's one comment. Originally, we did think in terms of proposing a type of a board, and we could do that, but I think that it probably makes sense. Our thought was to have the smaller group with these three appointees propose a structure. Now, keep in mind that it is permissible to have both the appointee approved by the county executive and the appointee approved by the council president vote on that structure, and they have to both approve it. Once again, you could get a little bit afoul of the control test if you simply, went too far on this. But I guess the other question is, if you wanted to create the board right now, or if you wanted to see the suggestion, the one thing that you'd want to do is, have a session where you talk through what you think is important about that board. And there are several criteria for this board. It's one thing to make sure the county has input. It's also one thing, there are other resources in the community that can be very valuable here. And there's different communities that you have to interact with for this, and that you want to bring them in. You want to make sure that they are supportive. You want to make sure that you have their attention, because it takes a lot of individuals to drive this whole process. You want the hospitality community on board. You want the medical community on board. You want private industry to be driving to take shows to the facility. So you do want to engage other members of the community to make this a very successful governance entity.
If I may, I just wanted to clarify one issue, just again, because these are complex issues, but I just want to make sure that the record is clear and council fully comprehends exactly what we're doing here. SMG is not MMPI's replacement. MMPI is still there, and so is SMG right now. SMG is working under MMPI. This entity is the replacement of MMPI, and the relationship that we had with MMPI would be the relationship that we would have with new entity now that it's taking MMPI's place. So I just, again, want to be very, I know these are very difficult concepts, but literally right now we have both SMG and MMPI in place. SMG will continue doing what it's doing, and we need the replacement for MMPI, which is what this
That's
entity
correct.
is
And
doing.
one thing I'll say to Councilman Miller's point, both are correct. Legally, this entity replaces MMPI. Practically, all the management responsibility that MMPI had in the past, they are required by the agreement to pass that down to SMG. They're required to have this operator. The way this really works, think about it conceptually like this. You have this governance entity. They are required to provide management, but they're required to provide it through this manager, SMG. Basically, they are there, the management comes from SMG, the financial responsibility comes from the county, and they are there, they're basically a coordinating entity that makes sure that contract with SMG is enforced and works with the county to make sure that revenues and expenses are accounted for in an open book fashion. So they don't have, they no longer have the profit motive that an MMPI did. They no longer have the ability to control in a closed book fashion the way MMPI did. They're an entity that's there, but the management goes down to SMG, and the financial responsibility, rights, and remedies come over to the county. That's essentially how it works.
All right, now, we have not gotten to 0245, is that correct?
Yes, and that's on the hotel, not on the convention center.
Okay. So we have to vote on this, eventually have to vote on this, the issue about the termination, which we don't have to do today, right? And we still have a number of budget items to do. Are you prepared to move on to 0245?
And I would propose to do that in less than 5 minutes.
Can you say your name in less than 5 minutes?
If I don't stutter.
All right, then let's have the clerk read that, and you got 5 minutes. We're going to put the clock on you.
Resolution number 2013-0245, a resolution authorizing a cooperative agreement among the county, city of Cleveland, and Cleveland-Cuyahoga County Port Authority relating to certain cooperative arrangements in connection with development of the county's convention center hotel and other cooperative activities, authorizing the conveyance of real property, authorizing and approving related matters, authorizing the county executive to execute the agreement and all other documents consistent with this resolution, and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Thank you. Now we're back on the hotel. And all this agreement does, this is almost it's sort of a pro forma agreement that it activates all the things that we've talked about in the past. And I've gone through and spoke with you about the financing structure. And I talked about how the bed tax works. And I've talked about how the TIF works and the property transaction works. All this really does is sets up the legal structure between the county and the port and the city that effectuates that. So, and you'll have this, you'll have the latest draft of this, which we think may be the final draft. You will have this afternoon. It's a small document. You can read it today. Essentially, what it does is it takes care of the property conveyances that have to technically occur to make the transaction happen. So there's a technical conveyance of property from the county to the city to the port, and then a lease back where the county once again takes control of it. And the reason we go through those different entities is they all convey different powers in the deal that we need. There is the provision in the document that enables us to, with the city, empowers us to have set up the pilots, the payments in lieu of taxes for the TIF, which is part of our capital stack financing structure. It sets that up. There is something here that sets forth the obligation, the commitment of the city to pledge their bed tax that's generated by the hotel into the project. we pledge our bed tax generated by the hotel into the project. It sets forth the independent obligation of the city, because they have an independent pledge of about $8 million that they're making into the project, and it refers to our ultimate commitment to put in the $10 million towards the bridge project, which was all part of the transaction I've described for a long time. So this is simply the document that allows for the conveyance of property, the agreement to finance the hotel improvements, and sort of just the commitments that we've made to each other. You can read it. It's just a purely legal document that sets forth the terms and conditions of those technical transfers, similar to other port deals which have been done before, which take advantage of where the county, the city, and the port are able to take advantage of each other's powers to make the deal happen.
And what's the time nature of this? This has to be done by December 31st?
This one has to be done right away, because we want
What does right away mean?
I believe the plan here was for this to be passed out of committee today and put on the agenda for your next board meeting.
Madam Chairperson.
Mr. Brady?
Has the, it seems obvious, and I think I know this, the city council is going to have to pass off on this probably
Yes,
exact
and they're
same
at the
language, correct?
Yes, and they're actually, they've already had their first reading of this. They're exactly in the same position we're at. And next Monday, so they've had their first reading. Now, they've had their first reading of a document that's similar to this. There's actually a subsequent change they've agreed to that we insisted on. They're in exactly the same position we are. And Majid, do you remember when their board meeting, when their council meeting is?
I don't know when and I think they're
Their
rushing
council
for it
meeting,
because
yeah.
they take a month off, I think, in December. So I think it's to be passed in November, because I don't.
Yeah,
we
I
have
think they're
meetings in
actually
December.
ahead of us. I think they're going to pass. They're going to have to pass.
Well,
it
they
before
also,
we even do it.
routinely pass everything under emergency
Yes.
with 14 votes or however many votes
But
that is
I
now.
think they have a
So
late December meeting.
we
for
don't
that as
generally
well.
do it that way.
I don't know if they even have meetings in December. I think that was an issue.
No, their final meeting is the 6th. They'll be off for 5 weeks.
So that's, I think,
Or the-
what pushed
I think
it
that's
also.
why and I think they're on the timetable to pass this before they go.
Right. And has the Port Authority, I assume,
Yes.
voted on this already?
Yes, they're fully engaged. Both those bodies are fully engaged and prepared to move forward, as I understand it.
More than that now, that's where I was.
All right, so do we need to pass this out of a committee today in order to get it on the agenda?
Just a point of clarification, the port board has not voted on it yet, but they're ready to move it very quickly, and they can meet a lot more quicker and easier than the more formal bodies, but it's moving through as well very quickly.
Madam President?
Yes, Mr. Miller.
Does this legislation commit us to the full financing for the hotel project through the use of the sales tax revenues?
In and of itself, it can't, because it commits us to pledge the cooperation to pursue all of these elements of the deal. But at the end of the day, we still have to get through the process in the spring where we get to a GMP, where we have specific bond legislation that has to go through in the spring. So once again, this is necessary but not sufficient.
The cleanest way to think of it is this is what gives us the ability to build a hotel, basically.
If there are no objections, I'll move approval of this resolution.
I don't have an objection, but I'd like to make a comment or make a request, actually. On our 4% low income benefit, I would like to know in detail what Turner plans to do to implement that 4%. Over the years, I've heard that there have been challenges. A lot of the low percent income have been low skilled as well, and maybe have not been maximized in past projects. So I'd just like to know what they plan to do specifically for that, so we can talk offline about that.
I do know that they're planning to have not just a presentation, but a continued series of presentations on this. I mean, we're all trying to figure out right now the best approach for the 4%. That's a challenge because it's not likely that you're going to have the highest skilled individuals in the 4% group. So how do you bridge that? And that's a challenge, but I think it's a challenge we're all openly trying to figure out the best techniques, and we're going to continue to have meetings and figure out how that can best be done.
As they work to figure that out, I'll share with you that this body, these 11 council members have overwhelmingly voted for to create a social entrepreneurship program. And one of those components was a green rehabbing and training of reentry population, and appears low income as well, in rehabbing. So there is work on providing skill created by this council. So we'd like to connect you with Mary Kelly over at the Office of Reentry, and that might be a source to help Turner Construction.
Okay, we can get that information. Yeah, Ms. Conwell?
I'd like to, through the chair, I'd like to make a request for, was the cooperative agreement sent to us? Copy of that?
You have.
Yes, no?
Yes, but I've been told that it's attorney-client privilege.
Well, it's in draft form, and there's we're hearing comments, and you can certainly. I don't know what your process is for reviewing the drafts and process, but you have them. And,
we'll work with you to get you what you need. I mean, we are, normally when we present, we have the final agreement in place and signed by the other party, but because of of what we need here, it's moving through as the final details are being negotiated, but the main elements, the core of the agreement, everything is in place, and actually a lot of it is repeated in the resolution, but we will get you a copy of the most recent draft.
Okay, and this may have been on what Miller touched, I'm not quite sure. If we move forward as a county entity and the city or the port doesn't, where does that put this project?
It stalls it. The current plan right now does require, and our current financing scheme does require the cooperation and collaboration of both the city and the port, and they have both indicated their willingness to provide that cooperation and collaboration. So while it would be a problem, we have no reason to believe that problem exists.
And has the city and the port also been privy to the agreement, the cooperative agreement, or they're in the same?
Oh, yes. They're from a timing point of view, they're in the same position you are. In other words, their lawyers have met with us on the agreement. It's been presented. It's just a timing question of when you meet and they meet. It's gone from the city. It's already had a first reading. It's in whatever committee structure they have for that. So they're in a
And
parallel
I think
position.
the way that Cleveland does it is a little bit different. Cleveland and the Port Authority do it is a little bit different because they usually go get the approval before they have the final agreement in place, and they give the director usually the ability to go ahead, negotiate, finalize the agreement, and sign it. We do it the other way around normally in the county where we have everything finished, then we come for the approval. So it's a little bit different. They're used to voting on things before the final agreement is fully in place. Our structure has been a little bit different than that.
I can tell you that we've been, we've been negotiating constantly with, Ken Silliman, Chris Warren, Sharon Dumas, all the people over there that are involved in that process we've been involved with. I'm not really sure what they do with their council, but they understand the deadlines, and they're pledging to work through their process in the same time frame we're working through ours, so we can have it all ready to go at the same time.
All right, there's been a motion by Mr. Brady and seconded by Mr. Schron to move this matter out of committee and put it on the next agenda for second reading, adoption under suspension of the rules. Is there any other questions on that? All right, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. This will be on the agenda. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Green.
We have a dissenting vote.
Sorry. This has got to be a routine here.
2 no's.
All right. 2 no's?
Me. Me.
I'm sorry.
Who is the other
Ms.
dissenting
Conwell
vote?
and Mr. Greenspan are both
and
no.
Conwell, thank you.
All right, so this will just, you're voting no to move it out of committee. All right, so now we also have the other item, 0244, which will be no action taken on.
What is the plan on moving that out of committee back, just sort of just getting an idea of the?
We have until the 10th, and so we'll have another committee meeting on the 3rd. Okay?
That's
All right. Okay. All right, Mr. Applebaum, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the capital budget, and do we want to take about a 5-minute break?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right.
Want to or have to?